It seemed like an all-day drive when you were a 4 or 5-year-old kid. Marvelous experience. The ride was as much fun as coming to the park, I thought, until you get to the park.
So I would pick up actually the trolley out here at Glen Echo to go downtown. And I can remember scenes from that trolley that you can't get anymore, going through backyards off MacArthur Boulevard, off Palisades, where there were donkeys and horses and geese and pigs and sheep. It's just amazing. It was a totally different world than it is now.
It would wend its way through Georgetown, past Georgetown University, and then as it got just outside of Washington, you went right into woods. It was all woods between here and Washington. And you went across a number of little trestles that were very, very high.
But half the fun was that ride along the river, you know. The trolley line and the park were indelibly linked.
As a kid, I used to go over and stop at the Sycamore store, get off the streetcar, eat 25 Twinkies and some big 16-ounce RC Colas, ride the roller coaster, and you can imagine what happened after the 3rd or 4th trip on the roller coaster. But the fact is, I'm a big Glen Echo fan in many, many ways. Later on, I appeared there as Bozo the Clown.
Ah, the coaster dip. I mean, you know, you had to have nerve to go up there. But as a little kid, I had nerve.
There was constant noise here. When you came onto the park, there would be a bell when the roller coaster was ready to go. The carousel was constantly playing. You could hear the fat lady. She was bending forward. She had a silly hat on and holding a purse, and she would be laughing heartily.
It's a very popular ride with couples. And when couples would get on this roller coaster at the top of the deep drop, the macho-type guys would always want to show off, so they would stand up as the thing was in descent. And I always thought it was like putting your life on the line, and I never did it, but I guess they got some admiration for that.
I can remember lying in bed at night in Cabin John and hearing the girls scream on the roller coaster.
We always thought it was funny to bombard people from the airplanes in World War II fashion. But we used to take snow cones and, you know, we just sort of drop them. So we've been thrown out of the park many times, many times.
And we had microphones, and we would call in a tip. And a tip is a Carney word for a crowd. And we would work the crowd. You had to do it. You just couldn't stand it, I guess, your age. And I can still remember most of it. I remember, if I don't guess your age, you get any $10 prize you like. Quarter get your choice. Who's next? Who's going to do it? Bring your wife over. Not your wife, the neighbor's wife. Come on, I got to pay my alimony too. Or somebody had a big belly on him. Hey, you with a buttermilk belly, come on over. Bring your family over here. Get them a $10 prize tonight. Here we go. Who's next? Who's going to do it? I'll guess your age.
And I was an oiler and a ticket taker on this ride that you see behind me here, which was the Cuddle Up.
They used to have a commercial that was on the radio, and it used to go like, fun is where you find it. Where do you find it? Glen Echo Amusement Park. The coaster dip is cool in the crystal pool for fun and thrills in the summer after dark. Glen Echo Amusement Park.
Everybody had to wear a smile. He wanted to make sure that all the operators, no matter how bad they may feel, always put on a happy face to please the people coming into the parks. Glen Echo Amusement Park, a place to have some fun.
Perhaps it's not as well known as Coney Island or Palisades Park, but Glen Echo Amusement Park, just outside Washington, D.C., once attracted tens of thousands of patrons every spring and summer. With this program, we commemorate the centennial celebration of the park and its original opening by Edwin and Edward Balsley back in 1891. And we dedicate our efforts to all of those who worked and rode and played and danced and swam and, yes, even protested here over the years. Many important events transpired here, beside that which is most evident, and that is the amusement park. This building right behind me, for example, was once part of the original Chautauqua Assembly. It was planned by the Balsley brothers in the summer of 1891. This development was part of a three-part real estate speculation that included the sale of homes in the then-new suburban creation of the town of Glen Echo, Maryland, and Glen Echo Heights, the establishment of the Glen Echo Cafe, an enormous resort hotel, and finally, the summer programs offered by the National Chautauqua Assembly. As Glen Echo Park evolved over the years, it changed hands and rides and amusements and even its audience. But one thing remains today. Glen Echo Park is still a great place to enjoy. Here's Glen Echo's story. And if you came here, it's your story too.
In the middle of 1888, Edward and Edwin Baltzley came from Philadelphia, where they had most recently been living, to Washington, where they had previously lived, and with the intention of starting a real estate company and developing real estate. This idea they had gotten at actually a cocktail party several years before from Andrew Carnegie. Edwin went into a phase of building as much capital as he could. He was an inventor. He patented several very creative inventions, went into production of an improved egg beater, and by 1888 had approximately $250,000 in his own personal accounts. Moved back to Washington, sending his brother Edward along first to begin procuring land in what's now Glen Echo. They began construction of a restaurant, a very large and elaborate restaurant built of cedar logs. They brought in cedar trees from about a 5-mile radius, eventually incorporating somewhere around 30,000 cedar trees into the building of the structure. The cafe was basically about 5 stories tall, and it was several hundred feet long, with small dining rooms, large dining rooms. They had covered walkways on the roof. They had covered walkways through the woods. They had some exposed walkways, small private balconies that overlooked the river and canal where you could dine. But they furnished the cafe with really the best materials available. By the time the cafe opened, they had already sold about 20% of the lots. It was actually called the Potomac Cafe. It was closer to the Indian name of Potomac. It was spelled out in 4 syllables with hyphens. Referred to generally as the Glen Echo Cafe, but its actual name was Potomac Cafe. To bring people from the city out to Glen Echo, they brought them out in carriages called tally-ho coaches. Had 6 people, seating for 6 people inside, usually the ladies, and another dozen or so people up on top, and were drawn by 6 to 8 horses and had all the leather interior, very fancy. The Washington elite just took to it instantly. The cafe was a great success, and then less than 6 months after it opened, it caught fire in the middle of the night and burned to the ground in less than 2 hours. Rather than scrap this project that was nearly complete, they went ahead and published this brochure, used it for land sales promotion, and went right back to business. Less than a month later, they publicly announced that they would develop a Chautauqua at Glen Echo. You had all these different political philosophies, social philosophies, scientific theories arising, many of which appeared to be in direct contradiction to traditional Christian teachings and background. 2 men one of whom was a Methodist minister, the other who was a businessman, came up with the idea of beginning a summer teaching institute to teach and equip Sunday school teachers to deal with controversial subjects. The origins of Chautauqua began in upstate New York near Lake Erie, on the shores of a lake called Chautauqua, where they'd live in a tent for a week, 2 weeks, a month. They'd take courses, lectures. As Chautauqua grew, people around the country began to be interested in opening local Chautauquas. In correspondence with the Chautauqua Institute in New York, developed a curriculum for the summer of 1890. They had John Philip Sousa's band come out and play performances. They began construction of a 6,000-seat amphitheater in January of 1890. With arches, they spanned the creek and had the creek run under the building. They later used the water power from the creek to run a series of water wheels, pulleys, belts, and levers that ran the bellows for the organ they had in the amphitheater. But they built this massive amphitheater in 6 months. The Chautauqua season was so successful that they decided to extend the season. When it finally closed down, people were happy. They were ready to come back the next year. Everything looked like it was ready to start off the following year, 1892, when late in August, several weeks later, Dr. Henry Spencer became quite ill and died quite suddenly. Rumors were spread throughout the Washington area that Dr. Spencer had died of malaria. The Baltzly brothers tried opening for several days in June of 1892 and had virtually no one attend. And the Chautauqua then closed its gates and never reopened as a Chautauqua at Glen Echo. By 1897, Edward Baltzly finally gave up, left the area, and went west to go prospecting for gold. Edwin stayed and tried to hold the properties and the lands together at Glen Echo, occasionally sold a building lot, but after the malaria scare, many people defaulted on their loans. He was stuck with property, lots of the property with unclear title, and went farther and farther into debt. Around 1896, the Washington and Great Falls Railroad Company extended a trolley line from Georgetown out along the Potomac River to Glen Echo. And they actually came to the gates of the park, which was something the Baltzlys had never managed to accomplish. Now Glen Echo had two new things. One, it had an easy method of transportation right to the gates, and it also had electricity in an abundance it had never seen before.
Amusement parks need three things. First, they need transportation. You've got to be able to get to the amusement park. So that's the innovation of the trolley. It's really a 1895 to 1905, 1910 innovation. That's when modern cities get streetcar lines. The second thing is you need space to lay out a large park. So amusement parks tended to be a mile or two from what was the congested part of the city. The third thing, which really I think defines the amusement park as we know it today, was electricity. To have mechanically driven rides that repeated the same experience over and over and over again. It's an extension of really two concepts. The first concept being just the kind of pure park. Chevy Chase Lake, they almost all had lakes, some kind of swimming pool or a boat ride, the use of water that would not necessarily, of course, be available easily in the city. You combine that with the theatrical performance. The amusement park industry really grew up as the summer home of vaudeville.
In 1899, they added a carousel, a bowling alley, a ride called a scenic railway, which was an extremely tame version of what eventually became roller coasters. By 1904, they had quite a few motorized electric rides. The grounds were covered with lights. The amphitheater was being used still for various forms of entertainment. This continued up through 1903, by which time Edwin Baltzly was so far in debt that he could not meet the payments on the loans.
Eventually, these grounds became the property of a company that ran both the trolley lines and the electric lines out here to the park. That was the arrangement of many amusement parks back then. That company was the Washington Railway and Electric Company. The year was 1911. What company officials figured was that they'd get a business that was promising, and they would promote it as this city's premier spot for family entertainment. The man chosen to lead this venture was Leonard Schloss. He was an established promoter from the Ingersoll Luna Amusement Parks chain. Schloss came into the park and he increased security. He removed anything he considered remotely objectionable, and he promised at least one new attraction every year. By 1914, there were 3 roller coaster-like rides at Glen Echo. There was the hydraulic dive, there was the gravity railway, and there was a brand new ride called the Derby Racer. One of the periods of Glen Echo's greatest expansion was the 1920s. In 1921, they opened with not 1, but 3 new major attractions. They took out the William Mangles Company carousel, and they replaced it with the brand new state-of-the-art Denzel, which still operates today at Glen Echo Park. This ride features 55 animals, such as rabbits, ostriches, reindeer, tigers. A first in its day, as carousels normally had only horses. The Wurlitzer band organ still booms out its numerous selections today. That same year, they took out the gravity railway and put in a brand new ride called the Coaster Dips, which became one of the park's biggest draws from 1921 to 1968.
The 20s were one of the greatest times for Glen Echo. They began having better-known bands playing at the evening dances in their ballroom. In 1923, Glen Echo installed the first bumper cars. It was then called the Scooter. It was the first bumper cars in any amusement park in the world.
They didn't call them bump cars, they called them Dodge 'em. Every season before the opening day, the owners of the Dodge 'em would have all us neighborhood kids come in at night and drive the different cars. We just had a ball, and it wasn't a matter going and riding the cars for 10 or 15 minutes. We might ride them for 2 hours.
The Dodge 'em I like too. You'd see somebody that was all discombobulated, didn't know what to push anything, and you headed for them. Hit them broadside like that. So what can I say? I was a dirty little rascal, still am.
Weekend attendance was often over 10,000 people. They came out on the trolleys, they came out in Model Ts, they came out in buses. Kind of typical and period clothing was seen at Glen Echo: argyle socks, straw hats, flapper dresses.
Another thing about Glen Echo Park was Pennyland. As far as I know, everything in there was a penny. Men would come in there on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. I come out there with maybe 50, 60, 70 cents. It's all according to what was dropped and what I could recover.
Glen Echo really entered the 1930s with a bang. They added more major attractions. Various rides came and went. The Chautauqua Amphitheater had been converted into a fun house, which was called the Midway.
Oh, the fun house was good. It had the air holes in the bottom that would blow up the skirts. It had the big barrel, which you tried to walk through. And it had the little scooter cars that would round the top of it that you'd get on, and they would coast all the way around to the other side.
There'd be a man up in a crow's nest, and he controlled all the air buttons. And he had one main button. He hit that air button and blow women's dresses up, and they'd scream and howl and carry on. And men stood around and got a big kick out of it.
And you'd pick up a tricycle and carry it over to the start of the ramp, climb up the steps, and sit down on your little tricycle and ride around the outside. And for whatever reason, it was enormously popular. People absolutely loved it. And this was almost all adults.
Oh man, we used to have crashes on it and everything, and the man in charge come running down the track. So you boys, come on, stop that stuff. Get them kiddie cars back, ride the things right, or I'm gonna kick you off of them.
In 1931, they constructed an enormous, larger than Olympic-sized swimming pool at Glen Echo. And next to the swimming pool was a quarter-acre beach. A few years later, a large reviewing stand was built so that people going to the park but not going swimming could actually sit in the stands and watch people at the pool.
I lived over on Tulane Avenue for several years, and I'm pretty familiar with Glen Echo Park and Crystal Pool and everything else. Crystal Pool was a place in itself. It could be separated from Glen Echo Park and it'd still be magnificent. Just two magnificent places in the same place.
The entrance to the pool was interesting because you sort of entered it below pool level. You walked in and there was turnstiles right at the front, and you paid. You could rent towels. You would get a key with an elastic band on it. You had to go through this maze of plumbing, which was a series of pipes that had openings in them, and water was under intense pressure, and they did this to squirt you off before you entered the pool area. You'd go through incredible gyrations to try and figure out a way to avoid the spray because it was ice cold water.
The partitions between the locker rooms were not real great. So for young kids, young boys, this was a very important feature of this pool.
There were actually 3 pools. There was a main pool. It was rounded at the shallow end with a fountain structure in the middle. There was a big, giant sliding board. There was an island in the middle of the pool.
Of course, before the pool deck was here, over to my left was what they call the diving tank, where the diving boards were. 2 low boards, 1 high board.
I worked in the park. I worked as a lifeguard at the Crystal Pool.
And over here on my left is the guardhouse, where the lifeguard house where we used to work out of.
Lifeguards here over the years some were nice, some were jerks. Of course, being the little brat, I got my share of trouble, but I used to get thrown out of here just like anybody else.
Oh boy, the Crystal Pool. This was a social hub of Washington. This was the singles thing of the 50s and the early 60s. Of course, you could go in there and meet a young lady and invite her to the various rides around the park. I had kind of an advantage in that respect because I was the operator of the tilt-a-whirl, so that gave me social respect. There's some sort of badge of honor attached to being in control of one of the rides out here. So during my flirtations, I always mentioned my occupation.
It would really get hopping. The thing that was neat about the swimming pool was they had underwater lights. And to be able to stay till the lights were on, that was really neat when you were a kid.
After a hard day's work, if you made it to the doors of the Crystal Pool, you were in like Flynn because you were going for a nice evening swim, sometimes with, sometimes without clothing.
It predated all of the private swim clubs in the area, which a lot of people think may have been a reaction to desegregation, at least in this part of the world.
Some of the most exciting evenings in Washington used to be spent here at the old Spanish Ballroom. Besides the rides and the other attractions, hundreds of men and women came here to Glen Echo to dance. Sometimes there were so many of them, they spilled out onto the grounds where I'm walking now. Aside from the local musicians who played here, like Jack Corey and Paul Kane, there were national headliners as well. Lawrence Welk played here. And of course, there were the Dorsey brothers.
2 years after the pool opened, the Crystal Ballroom was torn down, and in its place was built the Spanish Garden Ballroom, which still stands today at Glen Echo. This was 1933. The Spanish Garden Ballroom reflected something of the mission-style architecture, which was very popular in the Southwest United States. Big band dances and big band music became very popular at Glen Echo.
When I was coming up, when I was about 14, I guess, I began to hear about this cat named Francis Grady. He was like God, you know, on the tennis. God's going to play tonight. So anyhow, we had a kids band, and we played, and in 34, I'll just say 1934, we went down the beach, and we went down there for 4 years, $15 a week, room and board. Eddie joined us about 1938. And God came in and played with us a couple years, about 1939.
But anyway, we started in April. As I said before, it was cold. We had top coats. Some fellows brought little heaters out. As the summer went on, it got a little hot. But we tried to have a lot of fun. We had some crazy guys in the band. We had one guy that if he didn't like the music, new music was brought in after we played it at sight during the week, not on the weekends. Say Monday night, we always played new tunes. There wasn't a big crowd out here. If he didn't like the music, he'd just go around, pick it all up and tear it up and throw it away.
They come out by themselves. The girls would come out in the group, the guys would come out in the group. Some couples came out, but even when they did, they didn't spend the whole evening together. Everybody danced with everybody.
By the beginning of the 1940s, Glen Echo was changing its character somewhat. Americans were beginning to look more outside of their own backyard and to look at the world. And those attitudes were reflected at Glen Echo. Right at the beginning of the war, they had installed a ride called the motorboats. Gasoline rationing was the downfall of that ride when the shortage of gas from the war caused the park to have to close the ride. The park became a haven for servicemen. Servicemen would come out in large groups to the park and split off into 2s and 3s and walk through the park looking for excitement and dates.
In 1943, this was the place for us to come and enjoy ourselves, because on Sundays is when it was our time to come to Glen Echo Park. Of course, we rode the roller coaster, and I only rode it once because I rode with a person that I liked. We used to call ourselves government girls. We came and met the servicemen here purposely to dance.
Well, I got to be 19 years old, and I was quite the jitterbug. I had won the Midnight Jitterbug contest at the Lowe's Capitol Theater. So I was approached about teaching jitterbug here in the Spanish Ballroom. And I did on Friday nights. The dance would start at 9, and I would teach jitterbugging from 8 to 9. I taught many a serviceman how to jitterbug.
After the war, I became the first substitute on-call saxophone player. If some saxophone player wanted to be off, I worked out here with, I think I substituted with Kane several times, and with Sammy Farrow many times. And Sammy, he was a live wire. He'd run all around the stand. When he had his own band, I think he switched to trombone.
Well, I played trombone. I started out on drums, but I later played trombone, vibraphone, marimba, songs, funny songs.
Go!
We had a lot of behind-the-scene activities. Behind the scene. Glen Echo, we had a Miss Maryland contest, and I think Jim Gibbons was the announcer. He was the MC. But despite
I didn't know about that.
Despite all the tomfoolery, we played good music, and people got on that dance floor, and that's the main thing.
I played out here with Paul Kane's orchestra. I believe it was in 1942 and 1943. We played summers out here. The big influence in the music of those days, I would say, was Tommy Dorsey and Benny Goodman, and of course Glenn Miller.
And I did those series of broadcasts Friday nights at 11:30 to the network, and this place would be packed. I mean, there'd be, I don't know if it holds 1,000 people, but it seemed as though there were 1,000 people here. And I remember the opening line was, and I was scared to death because I was just a kid, was from the beautiful Spanish Ballroom at Glen Echo Park just outside the nation's capital, here's, and then whichever band it was. In my instance, it was Tommy Dorsey, Stan Kenton, the Woody Herman Band.
This series included not only the remotes or pickups, the concerts from Glen Echo, but from other places around the country. Our portion of it was Friday nights from about 9:30 to 10. I say about because I think there might have been a 5-minute run over there. We might not have started till 9:35, something like that. But at any rate, I was assigned to do this series.
Okay, and a good evening all across the country from Glen Echo Ballroom. And now, Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, the fabulous Dorseys, and Dry Bones.
Sitting there with Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, which was one of the highlights of my broadcasting. People say, well, you know, you've interviewed presidents and kings and all. I said, listen, I worked with Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, man. There was a real highlight. Sitting there with them and looking out over the crowd, I could see the billboards for the next attraction at Glen Echo. Now, we're talking about early September 1954. And so the next attraction might have been a week or 2 weeks later. The next attraction, Bill Haley and his Comets.
I got to do a dance band remote for NBC as a staff announcer, cupping my ear. Live from the Spanish Ballroom in Glen Echo, Maryland, it's the music of, and this is the interesting thing, they sent me out, I'd never heard of the group before. There was a young guy named Bill Haley. He had just started in the business and he had a band, and I just thought it was one of those bands, pretty much like a Guy Lombardo or somebody like that. I got to get on that stage and in my NBC announcer's voice, and now live from the Spanish Ballroom here at Glen Echo, it's the music of Bill Haley and the Comets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They started singing Rock Around the Clock. 15 minutes, I never got back on the stage. They were jumping and screaming, and I never could get back to the microphone to even finish announcing the show. I never got to end the show. I never got to say this program came to you from Glen Echo, and this is the National Broadcasting Company. There was so much action and so much activity and so much noise, the people in New York were screaming and yelling at me because I never signed the show off. I could never get back on the air again. So that was my fondest memory of doing my first and only dance band remote, Bill Haley and the Comets, Glen Echo Ballroom, and I was a disaster.
Much of what Washingtonians saw and heard on the early broadcast waves came from right here in Glen Echo Park. Mac McGarry and Willard Scott did early broadcasts here on the radio, and they ushered in the infancy of television. There were teen dances, Pepsi-Cola drinking contests, and other promotions that were featured on Jim Gibbons' show on WRC, and of course the very popular Milt Grant teen dance contest on WTTG. The post-war baby boom brought all kinds of children's shows in the 50s, including Willard's own stint as Bozo the Clown, and of course there was Lee Reynolds' Captain Tug. From the Crystal Pool and the Spanish Ballroom, they brought you television from the park.
The deepest, densest jungle ride in the world is in captivity at Glen Echo. For laughs and thrills a minute, see the next chance you come out to Glen Echo Amusement Park. Channel 7, Washington.
WTTG was so poor that we had to move our instruments, we had to do everything. We only had one studio. And in those days, if you made a mistake, you made a mistake. They had no tapes, no reruns. It was live. If you make a mistake, make a good one, you know.
And what we would do would be have a regular format in which we would time each cartoon, and I would have a list of the cartoons that were going to be shown. So I would know how much time I had and where we could move from. Like I might open the show at the airplanes and run a 4-minute cartoon. It took us 4 minutes to go set up somewhere else. Then we'd come back live and have a 5-minute cartoon, and I would go somewhere else. Well, the director of the show decided that I was going to ride the roller coaster. And I said, well, now, wait a minute. Why don't we just have me get on the roller coaster and it starts out, and then go to the cartoon, I get out, and then have the roller coaster go around, and then have it stop, and I'll get on. And they said, no, that'll be cheating. I said, you're right, that'll be cheating. I've got to ride it. So we had a 6-minute cartoon. I said, mateys, I'll be back. Watch this cartoon. I'm going to ride this roller coaster. Boy, is this going to be fun. We'll see you later. And off it went.
Oh, a capital ship for an ocean trip. Charlie Noble!
Aye, aye, Captain Tug, sir.
Stand by to cast off, please.
Aye, aye, sir.
Mr. Flanagan?
Yes, sir, Captain Tug, sir.
Start the engines and stand by to get underway, please.
Aye, Captain Tug, sir.
What I didn't take into account was that I'm riding this roller coaster and all this shredded foam rubber in there that made the stomach is going to be moving around like crazy. Well, the timing was perfect. The cartoon ended, and here comes the roller coaster, and here's Tug in there holding on for dear life. Oh, boy. Wow, what a ride that was in those days. And so I step up on the platform like this. Somebody hands me a microphone over here, and as I stood up, all the shredding in the thing had come up here, and my pants went right down around my ankles.
I went to work for Milt. As soon as I graduated from high school in 1959, I was his, well, we had a lot of different titles: production assistant, Girl Friday, Jack of all trades, secretary. All of those applied. The show was on Channel 5. It was on 7 days a week, though we were live 6 days a week. We taped the Sunday show. It was a dance party along the Order of American Bandstand, but of course it was for the Washington area.
Pink Champagne is done by the Tyrones, who appeared on our show just about 2 weeks ago. How'd you like that record? Some say it's too fast. Say, I want to remind you about Glen Echo, because we're going to have one swing in time at Glen Echo, the amusement park in Washington. You be sure to come on out, 8:30 to 11:30, Saturday nights at Glen Echo. The admission is but $1 drag, 75-cent stag, and we have the time of our lives with Johnny D., recording stars famous for his sitting in the balcony in person at our Glen Echo amusement park. Saturday night, so mark it down on your calendar and be sure to be there at 8:30. We have an 8-piece rock and roll orchestra. We have rock and roll bands from the whole area. And we have one swing in time, about 2,000 last week, so you be sure to get out. Say, will you all turn to your best girl now, fellas, and ask her to come out to Glen Echo? Okay. Glen Echo at 8:30.
Well, I was a regular on the Milk Ranch show. I went to school downtown D.C., went to the station, went on practically every day. It was exciting. We met everybody. Everybody. Frankie Avalon, Annette, Bobby Darin, Everly Brothers.
Shireen had crushes on all of them.
On all of them, yes. Paul Anka.
Used to also come down here for Coke dances. We had to come in with a bottle cap in order to get in. And it's Pepsi dances or Coke dances, either one. And Milt Grant used to sponsor them. I can remember wearing, the big thing was white pleated skirts, white tops, white sneakers, and white bobby socks.
There was an island out in the middle of the swimming pool, and sometimes the lip syncs, everything of course was a lip sync when an artist would be here. There was a particular artist one time, a lady, that's all I know, I don't remember who it was, who chose to do, or maybe was told to do her lip sync from out on this island. And so she got in the water and swam out to the island, and she was to come up out of the water singing her song, lip syncing her song, and she was wearing a beautiful white wool bathing suit. Now, of course, this was black and white television. As she came up out of the water, this white bathing suit on a wet body just tended to disappear. It was as though it wasn't there. And I remember all the cameramen just loved that.
Around the pool, we were not allowed to dance. It was slippery, no running. So what they would do was play records in the background and show all these sights in the park.
We could come up to the gate, then we would have to get back and go back into D.C. Now, my next door neighbor, Helen, she was white, and they lived next door to me until I think I got married. And her parents were the kind that let her go wherever we went. She could go with me. She used to go with me. We would ride the streetcars together. We would come out here. She wouldn't get off because she knew I couldn't. She would go to the movie with me, but she couldn't understand because I couldn't go to the movie with her. Her parents taught her, well, we're sorry, Dorothy can't go to the movie with you, but you can go to the movie with her.
I guess the thing that really bothered me more than anything was that the racial ugliness that surrounded the desegregation of the park really took away a lot of the fantasies. I guess it was sort of a time of letting go of childhood and letting go of a lot of things about youth. And to see people. I saw people that I knew cheer when George Lincoln Rockwell's people showed up. And that was really hard for me to understand.
One blemish on the otherwise remarkable history of the park is the fact that for many years it was segregated. But in the early 60s, that changed. In 1960, some divinity students from Howard University joined forces with residents of the Bannockburn community not far from here, and they caused a change in the park's policies. In fact, in 1961, the Montgomery County Council forced the park managers to admit blacks. But for 2 years, in order to walk into this park, you had to walk through pickets.
I was in one of the first groups as a young teenager to actually picket this park because of the segregation.
Glen Echo had been targeted as pretty much a test case for desegregation in the Washington area. They saw Glen Echo as one of the last stanchions that if they could get Glen Echo integrated, then anything could go and progress could be made in that area. It was very slow progress at Glen Echo. That picketing continued for 6 years.
I was a freshman at Howard University when the sit-in started in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I was one of about 4 people who established the Nonviolent Action Group, or NAG as we called ourselves, to have sit-ins in the metropolitan Washington area. Even prior to Glen Echo, we had sit-ins over in Alexandria, Virginia at a People's Drug Store because we could not eat at the lunch counter. And we ended up at Glen Echo. And this was essentially the summer of 1960, the end of my freshman year of college.
The group of kids came from Howard who were called the Nonviolent Action Group, NAG. And they came and they tried to buy tickets for the merry-go-round, I think it was. I wasn't here at that moment. And they were refused, the black ones were refused admission to the ride. Picketing started. The park, from what she could see, the reaction of the people at the administration at the park was extreme. They shut the rides down, they declared the park closed, and they told the kids to go home. Then they came back and they continued to picket during the summer, and the community, Bannockburn particularly, began to support them. And through Bannockburn, a network of civil rights activists throughout the region began to support it. There was one point I remember when the picket line was so white that I had to tell one black kid he couldn't go to the John until I got another black to replace him because I couldn't live with an all-white picket line.
Prior to 1960-61, this was forbidden territory to me and my family and many of our neighbors in Bannockburn. Our children had a hard time understanding why they couldn't ride the wonderful merry-go-round, and we listened every summer night to the noise of the Ferris wheel going up and down. It was off limits to us because we knew this was a place where only white people were welcome, where only white people's money could gain admission. The summer night that the Student Nonviolent Action Group came over and put up a picket line here was like a thunderbolt in terms of its effect on, I would say, galvanizing some hope.
We never knew from day to day whether or not somebody was going to throw a rock, a beer can, or a Coca-Cola bottle, or whether or not management was going to say, hey, you know, we don't want you out here, and we're going to either bring in dogs or... But we just did not know. We were not experienced. I mean, this was something that was new to us as well as, I suppose, new to the community.
There was one episode, come to think of it, that I think was the great success. The Nazis came down, Rockwell's group, and counter-picketed. And of course it gave us the chance to say, which side are you on? The casual people coming over, they were either with the Nazis or against them. They became the dominant dividing force They drew the line in the dust, as it were, and people were not about to follow the Rockwell kind of leadership. But the community became very coherent.
I had not been actively engaged in anything as confrontational as this experience. So it was a tremendous adventure for me. As a mother, I was very grateful that my children were being introduced to the fact that human beings make a difference, that you can put your body on the line, that there are nonviolent ways of challenging the social order.
By the end of the summer, we were very successful in terms of cutting down the patronage at the park. They closed Labor Day. They normally used to go later than that. My recollection is they closed earlier than usual. And over the winter, they just announced quietly that they were going to open integrated. And that was the end of the entire episode.
So there's great pride in what we collectively pulled out as an ongoing responsibility, having been sensitized by these young people who brought us here. So my gratitude towards them is unfounded, is deep in my soul, and the opportunity, one of the highlights of my own life.
In 1961, after 6 years of continual protesting, Glen Echo Park was desegregated. For the first time, the kind of amusement park carnival call of come one, come all was actually true.
As far as I was concerned, I loved being here, and I was romancing, and if someone didn't particularly think that I ought to be here, that was their problem. I was here. I never really had a sense that I didn't belong here.
Racial tensions were still strong at the park, and in 1966, early in the season on Easter Monday, due to unfortunate misunderstandings, a small riot broke out at Glen Echo. There are as many stories of why it happened as there are people to tell them. One of the rides, it was the roller coaster, was closed down due to minor damage, and the closing was not explained to the crowds. Many of the black patrons of the park viewed the closing as just another snub.
Because the photo machine that was right here was broken into and money stolen. I don't remember anybody being molested, but we had heard everybody to be very careful. There had been some rioting, and we were only getting piecemeal information because we were here inside the park, and as I recall, most of the action was outside of the park.
Oh, they tore everything up, everything. It was terrible. My brother said, everybody get in the house. I said, they don't want to come up here, I gotta tell you. And the colored neighborhood was right up behind us, but you never saw, they never got mixed in anything like that.
When the park shut down, there were a lot of these kids who had unused tickets. There was no easy way for them to get home.
This escalated the situation even farther. Later on in the day, many people, realizing that they weren't going to get buses to drive them home, began walking back to Washington. By this time, the local television stations had cameras out at Glen Echo. There were quite a few car windows and picture windows broken by thrown stones.
You had to come out MacArthur Boulevard, which was a lily white section anyway. You didn't have blacks living there. Unfortunately, we didn't have the type of transportation, bus transportation that was needed with that type of crowd. It was a holiday. And unfortunately, I think the police department was not prepared. The roving leaders who were there, fortunately, and thank God for them, because had it not been for them, I'm sure more violence would have occurred.
A lot of them got stranded, and they got caught up in the assumption that was spontaneous. In the conversation, a lot of kids thought that they had been taken because they had paid for rides, and you out that far out and you can't get back, and somebody taking your money and you put up a ride, the anxiety came out, and one thing led to another.
Blacks had
the same frustrations and entertainment possibilities that all Americans had who lived in cities at the turn of the century. Whereas the blacks live near downtown, have access to the streetcar lines that still exist or the buses, and could come out to Glen Echo in the same way that all urban people would want to at the turn of the century. It wasn't crowded, it was rural, it was different than what they were used to. It provided them an interesting experience. And so there was this as there was here, Atlanta and elsewhere, there was this clash. What do you do? Well, first the hardliners, as most business people are wont to do, don't do anything. Keep it lily white, keep the blacks out, they have their own amusements, etc. And slowly that breaks down. The other conflict, which is part of it, and Glen Echo was saved, but most amusement parks weren't. Mostly what happened was that as the suburbanization washed over where the amusement park location was, the land that the amusement park was on became too valuable. It was much more valuable to tear down the park and put up tract housing.
And now the Bakers were stuck with a property which was unprofitable to run as an amusement park, and which they could not even get a zoning to build on as they chose.
For a brief moment in my life, this park was very important to me. And I've always had fond memories of it. I think it was just the magic of the place.
The 4 seasons that I worked here are full of warm, fond memories of people, of family. These people were my second family. It's even emotional just to talk about it now.
The demise of Glen Echo Amusement Park was an emotional experience for many Washington area residents. As we can see now, a combination of factors contributed to its demise. True racial tension was an issue, but other amusement parks around the country lost their audience as well. Entertainment venues changed. The nation gained greater mobility. The land became too valuable to support a dying amusement park. Still, the spirit of Glen Echo remains alive today in the minds of those who once visited this place. Now, the National Park Service and the Glen Echo Park Foundation work together to maintain this historic landmark as a source of year-round activity. Today, everybody can dance in the ballroom, and you can learn to dance here too. Many people attend classes here in ballroom, swing, modern, and other dance forms as well. The Adventure Theater, the Puppet Theater, photography, sculpture, painting, and of course the carousel. The park probably never would have reopened without the monumental efforts of the Save the Carousel Committee and Glen Echo Council member Nancy Long in 1970. Some say this 102-year-old park has finally achieved its Chautauqua mandate to promote the learning of art, music, and poetry in a relaxed environment. The Balsley brothers probably would be proud.
The saving grace of Glen Echo Park is that even though it languished for several years after its closure as an amusement park in the early 1960s, it still remained strong in the hearts of many people. People like Nancy Long, Gilbert Goody, Senators Mac Mathias and Daniel Brewster, organizations such as the Potomac Valley League and the Cafritz Foundation, the town of Glen Echo and its mayor. The spirit of Glen Echo today embodies the fun and the romance and the adventure of the amusement park era, as well as the quest for knowledge and enlightenment of the Chautauqua era. And the National Park Service is privileged to have the responsibility to preserve and promote the very special spirit of Glen Echo.
Jungle Land was fun. That was the kind of thing where you took your boyfriend to. And we always used to meet our boyfriends down here because at that age we weren't supposed to have any. So we'd meet them down here and we'd go through Jungle Land because it's nice and dark and pretty scary. And we could all go, ah! And leap on them. It was a great excuse.
I must admit that over here they had Jungle Land, and I met my girlfriend here, my first real girlfriend, and I kissed her for the first time in Jungle Land. The ride operator turned off the ride, so it was just her and I in Jungle Land up on the second floor. We dated each other for a long time. In fact, even when I was in Vietnam, she still wrote me while I was over in Vietnam. Her name was Renee. She was from Glen Echo.
And I would bring her to Glen Echo. She too would ride the bunny that I rode. Now, I was about 3 years old when I first rode that bunny. I'm 71 now, so that's 68 years ago.
Fun things about it is seeing the kids and enjoying the small children. They really, their faces would light up, especially with the horses painted all brightly, and they just love it. And the parents seem to get a big kick out of it.
I used to have a job on Saturdays, come over and shine the brass on the poles. Everybody thought that stuff was magic, and it just stayed that way all the time. Well, let me tell you, that was the biggest pain in the neck and the hardest job I think I've ever had, shining that brass on those poles. And listening to that damn organ music the summer I worked the carousel. Drive you nuts.
The airplanes were right over there where that circle is now, and those were great because you could get up above and you could see the whole park all the way around, and you directed the plane, or you thought you were directing it, this little rudder thing that made it go in and out and in and out.
And one year I was the hot dog eating king, and that was shot in the same area we're standing now at about 9 o'clock in the morning. So it wasn't a real contest, but it was just all promotion. The hot dog contest was a fix.
When I came here, I could do a lot of things. I became a race car driver, you know. I was a no-hit pitcher. I mean, I could throw a strike at 90 miles an hour. I mean, I would always get a scream and a holler and a hug, you know. And I like that. I mean, that was, my thing was, is when I came to Glen Echo Park, I came here to romance.